So good afternoon, everyone, and I hope wherever you are tuning into this event today that you're staying safe and warm and cozy. I am Mary Barnaby, and I'm the Regional CEO for the American Red Cross, the Greater New York region. I'm proud to have that role. And it's really so great to welcome you all today. We've been waiting so long for this panel, and it's an important time for us to discuss how all of us can get together and help sickle cell patients, and also to raise awareness about the ongoing need for diverse blood donations. First, I want to start by saying thank you to all of you for joining us today. We know so many of you have Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, and it's just great that you're taking the time today to be with us for this important topic. And I also want to say thank you to our sponsors and to our community partners for all that you do every day to make our Red Cross mission possible. And I especially want to recognize our fantastic partner today, LVMH, for their support of today's program and of all of our efforts to help close the sickle cell gap. Today, we will first hear from one of our Red Cross treasures, Dr. Yvette Miller, who has dedicated her career to the fight against sickle cell. We'll then be joined by an amazing panel, and I mean amazing, of community members who will discuss sickle cell disease, the challenges and needs of ensuring a diverse blood supply, and all the efforts that are going on in the community to help close that gap. Before I introduce Dr. Miller, I did want to put out a call to action and encourage all eligible donors of all races and ethnicities to give blood or platelets to increase the diversity of the blood supply. And it's so important. I personally roll my sleeve up every 56 days as I can to provide blood. We sometimes have times of years where there are shortages, and it is so important that we all work together to do this. And I have to tell you, it feels so good when you're there and you give that blood and you sit up on the table and you just know that you're making a difference and you're helping to save lives. Our blood donation, one blood donation, I should say, can save up to 3 lives. So if you can, please donate and encourage your friends and families to donate also. So now let's get this conversation started. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Our featured speaker today is Dr. Miller, who currently serves as the Executive Medical Officer of the American Red Cross Donor and Client Support Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. She has been with Red Cross over 24 years, serving in various leadership capacities, including Regional Medical Director, Director of Apheresis Collections, and I know I said that wrong, Dr. Miller, so you'll correct me, and Clinical Services. As the Executive Medical Officer for the DCSC, she oversees donor eligibility, product management, and donor management. Her areas of interest focus on including diversifying the blood supply, blood donor education, African American donor recruitment and retention, addressing structural racism and its impact on equitable access to healthcare and economic development, and access to integrative medicine modalities for personal and community care. It is our great pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Yvette Miller. Thank you, Dr. Miller, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. And it is always a pleasure to share this information. And again, July the 1st will be 25 years with the Red Cross. So this has not only been, my profession, but it's also my passion. So thank you for inviting me to share this information today. So can you bring up the slides, please?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time bringing it up. Hold, give me 1 second, please.
That's technology. That's where we are today. So many meetings. Here we
go.
Great, perfection. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the general topic today, diversifying the blood donor pool and the need for African American donors to support sickle cell patients. Next slide, please. So what is sickle cell disease? And so most of us probably had our first introduction to sickle cell disease in high school biology. So this is going to be a really quick refresher. So it's a genetic disease that affects the shape and the lifespan of red blood cells. So the graphic on the left is what a normal red blood cell looks like. It has, it's soft, it's pliable, and flows easily through the vasculature of the body. And it has these two scooped out areas on both sides of the cell where the hemoglobin sits and carries oxygen. The right side, the graphic on the right side, is what a sickle cell looks like. And the term sickle cell actually came from, there is a farm implement that's called a sickle that's used to chop wheat and to chop weeds. And it is shaped like this. And you know, we as physicians are very simple. And so when we need to describe something, we usually think of something that people are really familiar with. And at the time that this disease was described, the sickle was an implement that was commonly used. So that's the term sickle cell disease. And so what happens in sickle cell disease is when a person is ill or dehydrated, has an infection, or has a pain crisis, there's low amounts of oxygen in the blood. And so that causes this abnormal hemoglobin within these cells to basically crystallize and forms the cells into this shape. And once these cells assume this shape, they cannot go back to the regular shape of a normal red blood cell. And so as these odd-shaped cells, they're very sticky, they're pointy, they stick to each other, and they block up the blood vessels of the body, and that's what causes the pain. So the way I describe the pain associated with sickle cell disease and has been described to me is like having a heart attack. And that's exactly what happens in a heart attack. The blood vessels of the heart are blocked off, and the heart is screaming for oxygen. And so that's the same kind of pain that people have with sickle cell disease. Once those blood vessels are blocked off, the tissues in their bodies and the organs are screaming for oxygen. And that's what causes that intense pain that has been just described to me as like somebody taking a nail and just driving it into your bones. So it's some of the most intense pain that all of us who don't have sickle cell disease cannot possibly imagine what that pain feels like. And so a part of sickle cell disease is anemia because these cells are very fragile, and the lifespan of a sickle cell is 15 days versus the lifespan of a normal red blood cell is 120 days. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about sickle trait. So sickle cell disease is the most common blood disease in the United States and affects about 100,000 people. And so, you know, compared to some other diseases that get, you know, more press and more research dollars and more drugs to treat them, sickle cell disease is the most common inherited disease. But just in the last 10 years, the dollars and the resources and the research and the drugs have just started to come in to treat sickle cell disease. And the healthcare community and the scientific community has absolutely said that what we have always known about sickle cell disease is that it is a disease that primarily affects marginalized communities, African Americans, Latinos, and the research dollars were there because of, you know, lack of access, you know, structural bias and structural racism. And so the medical community honors that is part of the trauma that we have caused to these communities. And so now it's really important for us to improve access to research, more research dollars, as well as more biotech companies developing medications to treat, as well as scientists developing more modalities to treat sickle cell disease. And all of those things are increasing by leaps and bounds. So sickle cell disease affects 1 in every 365 Black or African American births and 1 out of every 16,000 Hispanic American births. And so that's not a commonly known piece of information that the second largest population of individuals affected by sickle cell disease is the Latino population. So now let's talk about trait. So the graphic on the right shows parents that have that have a normal hemoglobin and they have sickle trait. So looking at the inheritance pattern, and the blue figure on the right is one of the offspring that has sickle cell disease. So every time parents that both have sickle trait have a child, they're basically spinning a roulette wheel. So every time they have a child, there's 25% chance that the child will have sickle cell disease. There's a 25% chance that the child will have normal hemoglobin. So, I mean, no trait at all. And there's a 50% chance that those offspring will have sickle trait. So it's just, spinning the roulette wheel. And pediatricians will tell you, and healthcare providers will tell you, that still in this day and age, many people of African and Latino and of African descent do not know their sickle trait status. So even though back in the 70s, when I was a child, there was a public health initiative to get African Americans tested for sickle cell disease. The only reason I know I have sickle cell trait is because when I was a resident, I did my own screening. But most people, those medical records are not following them. And only since 2006 has it been mandatory in every state in this country to test every newborn for sickle cell trait. And so you might ask the question, why are we testing every newborn instead of just people of African American or Latino descent? And that's because you can't tell by the way a person looks or what's on their birth certificate if they are susceptible to having sickle cell trait. So that's why every newborn in this country has to be tested for sickle cell trait in every state. Next slide, please. So why do we need diversity in the blood supply? First, to meet the transfusion needs of the general population. We knew from the 2010 census that the US population was becoming more diverse. So I am really excited to see the data that's going to come out of the 2020 census, as it has already been predicted that we're going to have, again, an even larger percentage of the population that are African American and mixed race and more diverse because of immigration as well. And so the donor pool should reflect the recipient population and recipient pool. And I'll talk a little bit more about this bullet, but to limit the red blood cell antigen or protein exposure and the development of antibodies for patients that receive large numbers of transfusions, and that is the description of the patient population with sickle cell disease. So in general, the closest red blood cell match for a patient receiving frequent transfusions come from donors of the same ethnic or genetic background. While in these conversations around diversifying the blood supply does involve race, again, there's a lot of language and a lot of energy and discussion around race, but really it's the individual's genetic background and ethnic background that connects the donors to the recipients in this respect regarding sickle cell disease. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot of what the Red Cross donor base looks like. So our donor base is like 84% Caucasian. It is around 4.5% African American, a little over 6% Hispanic, and around 3% Asian. So as you can clearly see, 83% of our population is not Caucasian. So our donor base clearly is not reflecting the distribution of race and ethnicity in the US population. So I need for you to keep that in mind. Okay, next slide, please. So remember in the previous bullet, I said that I'm going to talk a little about red cell antigens and Rh antigens. So on the left side of the screen are the antigens that are most common in the African American, those of African American ancestry. And on the right side of the screen are the antigens that are more prevalent in the people of European ancestry. So let's go down to the fourth row, pan down your eyes to the row that says 67%. So this red blood cell antigen is known as Duffy A negative B negative. And 67% of individuals with African ancestry have this red cell phenotype. Pan over to the European ancestry side, and you see that basically a person who is of strict European ancestry has basically 0 percentage of this phenotype within that blood, within that people of that ancestry. And then let's go down to number 4 where it says 52%. And so this is another red blood cell antigen known as KID, and 52% of those of African ancestry have this phenotype, JKB negative, and only 26% of those of European stock have this phenotype. So just looking at those two phenotypes, if a patient had these two phenotypes and we were trying to find a unit of blood to match them closely, it would be difficult, certainly not impossible, but it would be very difficult to find the unit of blood from someone of European ancestry. And as we've seen, our donor base is 84% Caucasian. So we would have to screen literally hundreds of units to find a single unit to match this patient. And now let's go to on the left side where it says 73% C negative. So this is an RH antigen. Our blood cells are ABO and RH. So this is the RH antigen. 73% of those of African ancestry are C negative, and only 32% of those of European ancestry are C negative. So again, if we were looking for a unit of blood that was C antigen negative, Duffy A negative, B negative, and JKB negative, again, we would have to screen hundreds of units based on our current population of donors, which are mostly Caucasian, to find these units for these patients. And think and understand this. Every moment that we spend looking for these units of blood to match these patients are having a crisis. More and more of their blood vessels are getting blocked off. Their condition is getting worse. So think about the need for this blood is really time sensitive and critical, because just like when you have a heart attack, when you use time, you're losing tissue and you're losing the heart muscle. So we need to have that same thinking when we're spending all this time identifying units of blood for patients with sickle cell disease in the current mix of the population of donors that we have. Next slide, please. We'll move on pretty quick. I already talked about the RH, so we can just move past this one, because this is the slide that will really make it crystal clear to you all those words I just gave you. So in this particular case, at the top where it says need, we'll be looking for a unit of blood for a particular recipient that is O type, that is C negative, E negative, KEL negative, and JKB negative. So if we screened 250 units of blood from our primarily Caucasian population of donors, we would find a single unit if we screened 250 units. Next slide, please. So if we had a large number of units donated by African Americans, if we screened units of blood for this same recipient, we would find at least 28 units out of those 250. So again, this picture should make it crystal clear what the need is for the to diversify the donor pool and add African American donors. Next slide, please. So these are the words of one of our recipients. His name is Blaze, and he was born with sickle cell disease as a child, and he needed a transfusion once a month, starting when he was just a child. And so now as an adult, he needs transfusions 9 to 10 times a year. And the number of units that a person needs per transfusion is based on their body type. So a baby may only need just a syringe full of blood, as opposed to a large adult, which may need 9 or 10 or more units, depending on their blood volume and their body mass area, to give them enough blood to replace those sickle red blood cells. And so every time Blaine gets transfused, he needs at least 3 units. And so his words are, when I receive blood donations that I need and my numbers go up, I feel like I'm back to myself. I don't feel the pain. I don't feel drained. It's like putting gas in the car and batteries in your remote. I'm energized. So his words tell you what it feels like to get a transfusion. Next slide, please. So we were always struggling to meet the transfusion needs of patients, regarding the number of African American blood donors we have. But since COVID-19 hit, so we're around around 4%, a little less than 4% of our donor base. As COVID hit, we were around 4, maybe 5%. But since COVID hit, we were down to less than 2%. And now we're only at about 2%. So you can see from this graphic that we are still nowhere near where we were. So COVID-19, of course, has hit the African American and the Latino and communities of color very hard, and we're still getting hit very hard. So that has certainly led to not as many blood donors presenting because, for lots of different reasons, but one is self-preservation, as we, do recommend that people who have chronic medical conditions, that you limit your exposure and coming out into public. And though it is absolutely and 100% safe to come donate blood, and, we're taking every CDC precaution and recommendation, everybody's wearing masks, the donors, our staff, everybody has to wear a mask, people still may feel at risk. And so our population of African-American donors has certainly still not completely recovered. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about this project, this enterprise-wide for the entire Mercury Red Cross. It's called Closing the Sickle Cell Gap by Increasing African-American Blood Donors, and it's called the CEK project. And the C, the E, and the K are those red blood cell and Rh antigens that I previously described. I talked about C. E is another Rh antigen, but K is an antigen, a red blood cell antigen called KEL. And KEL is a very strong antigen, so that if a patient who is KEL negative gets a unit of blood that's KEL positive, there's a great likelihood that they would develop an antibody. And remember, I said that the reason why we need the blood closely matched for individuals that receive frequent transfusions is because we do not want them to develop antibodies. This is another reason for this project. So every time a patient develops an antibody, so if this KEL negative patient developed an antibody to KEL, that means every single time that patient receives a unit of blood, it has to be KEL negative. And so that's the problem. Every antibody that a recipient develops, that makes it more difficult to find a compatible unit on subsequent transfusions. So our objective is to prevent the patient from developing an antibody by making sure those units of blood are as closely matched as possible. And in general, the closest match is from someone of the same ethnic group or genetic background. So I hope you all are really seeing, the knowledge that I'm delivering here. So the Red Cross project, the CEK project to close the sickle cell gap and provide these units for patients are in 2 phases. We're in the first phase now, where we have engaged one of the premier African-American public relations firm, Burrell Communications, to help us develop content and messaging and doing outreach. And we're developing all those tools now. So in phase 1, what we're doing is focusing on community-based organizations. So what we're doing is building up our partnership with organizations, so that when we move into phase 2, where we really start to gear up outreach and increase collections, we will already have those strong partnerships with community-based organizations, sororities, fraternities, the Ys, YMCA, YWCA. I don't even think they call it the YMCA or WCA anymore. I think it's just called the Ys, and other community-based organizations, like organizations that focus on sickle cell disease and that focus on removing limited access to healthcare. Partnering with all those organizations to get the messaging out and encourage people to donate is really a significant piece. And then in phase 2 is then when we will launch the public-facing targeted education program and really start engaging, just a wide variety, of other partners and, getting that information out. And we, as part of phase 1, we have hired specific individuals that will be focused on outreach to the African-American community. That's the only job that they do, will be focused on the partnerships as well as recruiting African-American and Latino and diverse blood donors. Next slide, please. And so this is just sort of the 1-year timeline. I'll just run through this really quickly. So so in January, what we did was, again, we hired all of the individuals. We created some of the marketing materials that we needed. And because, usually when we do blood drives, we have a blood drive sponsor who does, all the recruiting and scheduling appointments. But now that we don't have that model anymore, we collect about 25% of our blood from high schools and colleges. Since high school and colleges are not in session like they were previously, we are now doing what's called direct to donor marketing. So we're sending out direct emails, broadcast voicemails, and touching these individuals in very different ways than we have traditionally. And so we are working through that. We're in Q3 of FY 2021. And in April, a beautiful thing is going to happen. We're going to start a pilot project. We're going to do sickle cell trait testing. And so now we only do sickle trait testing if a hospital requests that the donor be sickle trait tested, or there's some other circumstances where we test donors. Because there's a lot of logistics around sickle cell trait testing that, we haven't done on a large scale. So we're going to start this project, in the beginning to start, working out the project and the process of how we might be able to implement this, system-wide on an ongoing basis. So that pilot project starts in April. And then the rest of this is just talking about the other things that we'll do the rest of the year. We'll have projects associated with Sickle Cell Awareness Month. Also, in June is Dr. Charles Drew's birthday. We usually have blood drives during that time. And also World Sickle Cell Day is in June. So this is just give you some idea of all the projects that we're going on and the phases that we are in. And I think that's the last slide. Yes.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I appreciate your attention. And I don't know if we'll have time for questions. Maybe we can do that. We can incorporate some of the questions into the panel.
We will, Dr. Miller. So
Okay.
I will ask our panelists to turn their cameras back on. Let's see if we can bring them all back. Here we all are. Great. And next, Stephanie Dunn Ashley will help kick off our panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. Really riveting information. Thank you for sharing that all with us. It's been great to hear from your side of things. It's been great to hear all of the inroads that have been going on, and we're so grateful for your leadership. 25 years with the Red Cross. That's incredible. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephanie Dunn Ashley. I'm the CEO of Metro New York North Chapter of the American Red Cross, which includes Westchester and Rockland counties, Greenwich, Connecticut, and the West Point Military Academy. One thing that is really very pertinent to our chapter is blood collection. It's an integral part of the services that the Red Cross delivers each and every day. We are very fortunate here in Metro New York North Chapter to actually be building a fixed blood site for the area, for the region, which should be hopefully opened this summer. It's right now under construction at our 99 Indian Field Road facility. So we will have the ability to do so many things there, from platelet, plasma, and regular blood collection. And to your point, Dr. Miller, it's very vital for everyone. The more people we get in, the more we can test, and the more we can find matches for so many rare blood diseases, including sickle cell. As most of you may know, we are the blood supply for over 40% of the nation's blood. I'm a blood donor, like Mary is as well, every 56 days. I am, in fact, my last one was last week. I love that we are now, and we have been for a while, checking for COVID antibodies from every blood donor that comes in, and we're doing a variety of other tests as well. So it's a really, really important role. It's the gift of life. As Mary said earlier, it's the gift of 3 lives for every blood donation that you give. But I'm going to move on to today's wonderfully esteemed panel of panelists, as well as our moderator, who is a personal friend of mine, Dr. Kim Nichols, a longtime Metro New York North Red Cross board member. She is a proud member of this community. She chairs our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and I'm so thrilled to have her here. Dr. Nichols, so I'll give you a little background on her. Dr. Nichols is a Harvard-trained, board-certified dermatologist that treats for both medical and cosmetic skin concerns. She graduated cum laude from Harvard, attended NYU School of Medicine, and completed her dermatology residency at King Drew Harbor UCLA Medical Center, where she served as chief resident. Dr. Nichols has been featured on the Megyn Kelly Today Show. The Dr. Oz Show is regularly featured as a skincare expert in national health and beauty magazines, such as Women's Health, Parents Magazine, and News Channel 12. She does a ton of online Instagram and Facebook posts, and brings her skincare and regime to life with a lot of social media as well. So we're very pleased to have her here. She is a Greenwich resident, physician, and philanthropist. And I absolutely cannot give her more kudos, because she is not only is she all that, but she always has a smile and is always willing to step in and step up to the plate. So thank you for moderating today's panel, Dr. Nichols. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Kisha Mitchell-Richards. She is the Director of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at Greenwich Hospital in my hometown, Greenwich, Connecticut. Hello, Dr. Richards. Dr. Richards began her career as an academic gastroenterologist pathologist at Yale University, and subsequently became an associate professor and director of autopsy. She departed Yale and became a general community pathologist at Greenwich Hospital in 2016 and was promoted to director in 2018. Her professional interests include making pathology and the pathologist more accessible to patients and bolstering physician involvement in healthcare administration. Originally from Jamaica, Dr. Richards earned her medical degree from the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica. Dr. Richards shared with us that in Jamaica, sickle cell trait carriers are about 10% of the population, and just under 2 out of every 1,000 people have sickle cell disease. In addition, one of her sons has sickle cell disease traits. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Richards. We welcome you today. I'm not sure I see Senator Sanders, so I will turn.
Senator Sanders is on, but we don't have his video yet.
Okay, so I will introduce him. We are honored to be joined by one of our great state senators, James Sanders Jr. Senator Sanders is a lifelong public servant, Marine Corps veteran, and proponent of education and an advocate for the working class families. He continues to approach the legislature with a fresh perspective and promise to bring economic opportunities and resources to the people of Southeast Queens. During each legislative session, Senator Sanders is consistently introducing bills and getting them passed. The legislation covers a variety of issues, including unemployment, education, domestic violence, mental health, consumer protections, property sales, foreclosure mitigation, and all of these aim to improve life for the residents of his 10th senatorial district, as well as the entire state of New York. One such bill was the Sickle Cell Treatment Act of 2019, which we look forward to hearing more about today. Senator Sanders, I welcome you. Hopefully we'll see you on video in a little bit. We are very grateful to be joined today by Taisha Rochester, who has healed from sickle cell. Hi, Taisha.
Hello, everyone.
Taisha was diagnosed. Sorry.
It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you so much. Taisha was diagnosed as a young child with sickle cell anemia. The first sign of the disease was when her left leg was found swollen and her mom found her hopping around on it. This alarmed her mother, Gloria, and who fought diligently to take care of her child and became a leading advocate for sickle cell disease in the state of New York. I have one other panelist I don't see either. Is Christopher Archnard on?
So Christopher has not joined us yet, but when he does, I will let you know.
Okay. I'll introduce him and give a little background on him. Christopher Archnard serves as the executive director of the Southwest Louisiana Sickle Cell Anemia Incorporated nonprofit organization. It's dedicated to enhance the quality of life for people with sickle cell disease, their family, and the community. So those are all our panelists. I welcome each and every one of you. From our house to yours, Dr. Nichols, I'm turning it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for that wonderful introduction for all of us panelists. And I'm just so honored to be asked to be a moderator with this group of panelists who are, distinguished members of the community, Red Cross executives like you, Mary and Stephanie, and of course, the amazing speaker, Dr. Yvette Miller. So I just wanted to kind of, head things off by asking Taisha a question, because I know, Taisha, you're someone who suffered from sickle cell yourself, so who better to talk to? So when you were a child, you suffered from sickle cell. What do you remember from that time? And what advice do you give for sickle cell patients and families?
Well, first I want to greet American Red Cross, first of all. I love Red Cross. I'm a campaigner. I do a lot of work, community outbase down here in South Florida. I work with the radio stations, and it's a reward to serve. That's one of my goals because, okay, you had suffering for so long, you got to go help somebody, of course, be a human, what do you call it, a humanitarian. So the question was, what do I remember the most? The pain. It's very painful. It's very anxious. You never know when it's gonna come. It's like a it's like a monster that gets you. Just thinking about it, like make my heart skip a beat. So it's a feeling that your nerves never want to feel. Your body never wants to feel this. I feel like everyday people has pain, but people that go through some form of dis-ease or illness, they really go through some stuff. And it's humbling because you put your life in so many strange people's hands and you're like, oh my gosh, are you gonna help me? Like, take this pain away. So what I remember, it was really painful. I remember Queens General Hospital. My mother's like a nurse. Miss Gloria Rochester is like, Miss Gloria Rochester. She wants to help, and she shared the story of her experience as a mother dealing with a child with sickle cell. I can imagine it's really hard. Okay, you got to really have that good soul in you to do this because it's really hard. So one of the biggest things that saved me is getting a blood transfusion. So between 1973, when I was born, and I'd say when I moved here, blood transfusions were like what you would call, Mr. Blaze, a oil in the engine. I never want to look sick. I didn't accept this illness. I knew if I could just do what I need to do, I could get out of this torment, because you have to learn how to adjust yourself. You got to explain a lot of things to people, and it's like, oh God, you have to be very determined.
I totally understand. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to express the pain part because that's just the problem. Nobody don't want to feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? You don't want to feel agitated. Like, for example, you're a dermatologist, your skin is beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get my skin intact.
It looks beautiful.
Thank you. But you just want to make a solution, out of whatever the problem is. So blood was the biggest thing. When I moved here in 2001, I don't want to skip the gun, but I was diagnosed with iron overload. Now, hello, that blood transfusion helped me to get out of a crisis because, as Dr. Miller stated, it takes about 15 to 120 days for that sickled blood to get out of your body.
Right.
So what are you going to do to make sure? So I find that growing up in a Caribbean household, having like people who are connected with natural foods like cassava and white yam, millet and different things, Irish moss. Those things are very imperative to feed the nucleus of a cell. It has to be renewed. And
so you found that very helpful in managing, your disease.
Yes, I don't want to go on, but having a blood transfusion does help.
And do you have any advice for, let's say new families, that are unfortunately, a child is diagnosed? in terms of negotiating the healthcare system, anything in terms of things that, as far as getting the help they need, or things that you saw from your past, which, could be improved?
Right. With any disease or anything, you're a human. You're one from one. You're one from one. And so one blood cell makes many. And so we're all a part of each other by one, in a sense. And so therefore, educate yourself. Make sure you know what's going on about what's going on. Ask questions. Never be afraid to ask questions. And try to find the right support group. People that will help support you and nurture you back into healing. That's very imperative.
I think that's such a great point in terms of, educating yourself, because of course, as a patient or a patient's family, you need to know in terms of what's going on with your own body and or your child. So I think that's just, such great advice. And thank you for sharing a little bit about your story, Taisha.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Doctor.
And to another one of the panelists, Dr. Richards. How are you today? So as a medical provider, you've seen firsthand the impact.
To unmute.
That's okay.
That's how I am today.
There you are. You've seen firsthand the impact of disease like sickle cell in Black, Latino, and Middle Eastern communities. What roles and responsibilities do all medical professionals have to support patients and to encourage blood donation? And how can we work together to improve outcomes?
So it's very important that we recognize we could have an all-day session on sickle cell and healthcare disparity and what it means for our community and overall what it means for our country. Sickle cell disease is so significant among Blacks, Mediterraneans, that we really have to take the opportunity to educate ourselves as physicians. We have to educate our population. So we have to educate our patients. We have to educate our community. That means sometimes it's not necessarily when you're seeing someone in your office or in your practice, but that might be at church. It might be at a baseball game. It might be in any setting where you encounter someone that you can share the knowledge you have of sickle cell disease. The funding and the research devoted to sickle cell, when you look at what's devoted to diseases that are far less common, like cystic fibrosis, we're looking at 30-1 in terms of the resources devoted. So as individual practitioners, we really need to take the opportunity to educate our population. We have to diversify the blood supply. That's the bottom line. It's very challenging. And, Taisha mentioned a couple of things that I do want to touch on. One is that complication, which is less well known, that iron overload, which one of the things we do to treat iron overload is exchange transfusion. So it's not simple transfusion where you just get blood. No. It is the process by which we take some of your blood, we give you new blood, and that reduces the amount of not just the sickled red cells, but the iron that is in your blood. So it helps offset and treat that complication Taisha mentioned. And we can only do that if we have an adequate blood supply from a diverse group. So we really need to get our people out. We need to get our community out. And there are ways we can do that. There is not a lot of good data, but the data that's there tells us if we talk to our churches, there was something called the Black Sabbath program for sickle cell disease. That was helpful. There are mailing programs. If you send flyers out to communities where we have overwhelming numbers of Blacks and minorities, where we educate them, or people sometimes just don't know. They don't understand. And whether you're a Black physician or not, if you know and you have that understanding and you can share that knowledge, you can explain to people what it does mean when they give that one unit, even that one time. And when they discover that they might be unique in terms of their makeup of their blood, if they give those units over and over again, they're saving multiple lives. they're diminishing the likelihood of iron overload. And so they are helping to mitigate that healthcare disparity that currently exists with sickle cell disease.
Absolutely.
And what do you, I mean, I love that you brought up that point in terms of educating. What do you find is some of the biggest obstacles or hesitations of, African Americans and Latinos in donating blood?
I think number one, we have a general distrust of the healthcare system.
Right.
And I'm not going to say that's not real or shouldn't be well placed, but we've made a lot of strides. We've come a long way. And there are measures put in place to mitigate some of the things that led to that distrust. So the first thing I want to say is, if you are not going because you distrust healthcare, when you get sicker, you're going to have a bigger problem, right? So I think that's number one. Sometimes we think we shouldn't go because we won't be accepted, because we may have this or we may have that, but we'd be surprised to know that they will evaluate and they will determine, can we take your blood? And we should leave that decision to the Red Cross, right? And then I think the third thing is, we think it's going to make us weaker. The reality is that we do replenish. Our blood cells will regenerate. And so there is not going to be enough blood taken from anyone that is going to cause you to go home and faint or feel weaker. Right. Instead, I think even just the mental reward of knowing I came, I went, I donated, I gave, giving replenishes. And I think that's what we need to really just let our community know when they think about these things.
That's just so huge, because giving those points, because then we can sort of, attack it knowing, the hesitations that people have and really confront them, in terms of education. So thank you so much for your words about that. So I'd like to talk to Senator Sanders, if he's on. Is Dr. Sanders on? Raise a hand.
Senator Sanders, I can see that you're here. I'm not sure if you can unmute yourself in order to speak.
Let's see. And what about Christopher?
I trust you can hear me now.
Oh, there he is.
I am having major problems, but that's all right. We're not gonna let this stop us at all.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, and thank you for your patience with the audio-visual issue. So thank you for being with us today. You introduced the Sickle Cell Treatment Act of 2019 in the New York State Legislature. Can you tell us a little bit about the bill and how it would help sickle cell patients? And what made you decide to write this legislation?
Well, I'll take it in reverse. It's easy to explain why not only are many of the people in my district beset by this disease, but I also am a trait carrier of the disease. So it is easy for me to understand this. And it's also easy to explain the bill. We need to do more research on this area. This is an area of science, like as you were speaking earlier, where the science that had to do with people of African descent has been woefully inadequate in this country. And we have to do something about it. And as a legislator, I am going to do something about it. I am doing things about it. First, we're putting money forward so that we can do more research on this issue in New York State. And that is the primary driver of the bill. Then we need to tackle this dreaded illness. Our good neighbor, Ms. Richards, was saying that, and in very graphically speaking to her experiences of what she is dealing with. And, you're certainly in my prayers, and I'm glad that you have gone from a victim to a victor. Please continue that. So that's the agenda that I'm pursuing with this bill at the state Senate level.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, and like Dr. Miller had mentioned, and your sort of impetus for your bill. I mean, if we don't get the research dollars, we're not going to really be able to tackle this disease in the comprehensive way that it should be. So I think, we're definitely seeing more dollars going towards it, but, continuing to push, the government and our, biotech companies to put the money into this disease is going to be, a continual push for all of us. So thank you for your work, and please keep it up.
Absolutely. If Ms. Richards and people like her keep it up, then we absolutely would join her in this.
Yes, thank you. So, Dr. Miller, you had mentioned at the end of your talk, talking about the fact that, unfortunately, the numbers of Blacks and Latinos donating has gone even lower now with COVID. What are your thoughts about how we turn that around in terms of even, obviously we want it to be even better than the status quo, but really speaking to that as far as, making sure that people feel safe donating blood?
Oh, thank you for that question. So, some of the things that we've been doing is that we, on our website, on our social media platform, we make it extremely clear, all the things we are doing at every blood collection site, how everyone has to have an appointment so we can manage flow, so we just don't have people showing up. We definitely abide by and use all of the CDC recommendations regarding cleaning, as well as regarding wearing masks and social distancing. So we make it clear that we're doing everything to give people that level of comfort that when they come in, they can feel, can understand that we're doing everything to keep the collection site safe. We're definitely stepping up our partnership with community-based organizations and churches to get that message out. And so that people don't have to come into the collection site, we're asking local organizations to donate site to us so we can hold the blood drives close to where people live and where they feel comfortable. We're definitely doing that. And I already mentioned that we're doing direct to donor marketing. And so one of the things that I commonly hear of why people don't donate blood is because they say, nobody has ever asked me to donate. So so everybody that's on this call, and I'm asking you to donate blood, if you are healthy and well, and if you've had COVID-19, as long as you have fully recovered and at least 14 days since the last symptoms as it stands right now, please come in and donate. And if you're not eligible to donate, I know you know somebody who is. So if you can't, you need to reach out and touch somebody, like Dr. Ross said, and get somebody to donate for you if you're not eligible to donate. And just be encouraging and supportive and bringing people in and sharing these messages that you have heard today, that in each and every one of us, we can save at least 3 lives with a single unit of blood, and that we are literally donors, African-American, Latino, again, Mediterranean donor individuals, diversifying the blood supply. We are the lifeblood for people who have sickle cell disease. Literally, we provide the lifeblood for people with sickle cell disease. So if that doesn't touch your heart and your mind all at the same time, call me.
I'm going out right now, I promise.
Yep.
Well, and I'll tell you, Stephanie was speaking to me, I'm very into social media in terms of my business, but I'll tell you, one of the things that we can all do is that when we donate, post it. People want to see us being proud of it as people of color who are donating blood. We really need to show that off, and it's a great visual way to convince people to donate. So, don't be shy about having the guy take a couple photos of you while you're donating, for sure.
And if you
so I know, we're in the interest of everybody's time. We've got a few minutes left. Stephanie, I don't know if there's any questions that came up on the Q&A that you wanted to, that we haven't addressed yet.
I want to thank you guys, that you've done such a fantastic job. There have been a few questions, and thank you for those who've been answering them. That's terrific. There is a question, a couple of, I'll read one off. Are rates of sickle cell disease the same in African patients as in African American patients? And are there regional differences within the United States in terms of the need for blood donors?
Well, there are regional differences because remember it's based on population that are susceptible to have sickle cell disease. So if you have, a population that's not very diverse, then in general the need is not that that large in that particular community. So in large metropolitan communities where there's a really diverse population, there's definitely more need there. And then that question about are individuals from the African continent as affected by sickle cell disease as African Americans, the answer to that question is yes. And I was just looking at some information just today that I'm going to present to some of the other medical directors about research that is going on in Nigeria regarding individuals with sickle cell disease. So, it is definitely a worldwide disease with significant populations affected, yes.
So if I could just piggyback to that sickle cell disease kind of evolved from a protective mechanism where sickle cell trait is protective against malaria, certain types of malaria in different ways, right? There are different things our body will do to compensate. So sickle cell trait was initially protective. So you will find that it's highest, or it was highest, in areas that had a certain type of malaria, Plasmodium falciparum. So it's, so now is a time that it's no longer, when you have sickle cell disease, it is not protective. And now is a time that we have to protect those that evolved out of a protective mechanism.
Correct.
I think you kind of have to associate these. It's not, somebody didn't pick sickle cell disease. It was an evolutionary mechanism that is now producing a disease that we can help to mitigate by blood transfusion. So I think that's all part of the packaging that we have to get people to understand. How did this come about? Why do we have it more than others? What can we do to help? And, the foundation of molecular research, sickle cell disease was very important in that, and somehow has been left behind. So I think that's our role, is to explain to people, how did we get here? And what do we do to help us move beyond this?
Absolutely.
And I had a question to that, point that Dr. Miller had brought up earlier. Where can adults who weren't, where it wasn't mandated to be tested for the trait as babies, where can they go to get tested?
Well, they can certainly go to their healthcare provider and ask to be tested, but there are organizations, particularly like Sickle Cell Disease Association of America, and sometimes there are joint blood drives and partnerships with the SDAA, and there are a myriad of organizations that focus on sickle cell disease that can provide testing.
Awesome, thank you. Stephanie, any more questions?
There, sorry, Taisha has one, and there are a lot. I would love to just I'm cautious of everyone's time. It's actually 1 o'clock. We will answer the questions in the chat. Taisha, I'll go ahead. You've got a question.
Really quick, I just want to say, as a social bug, I had to get better to help. And so what I get to find out is that what can you do to build your blood? Now, I do know that sickle cell is everywhere. It's in Africa, and it is in African Americans as well. But what I get to understand, just by having a lot of other clients that has sickle cell as well, I learned that Africa is not as affected as much as African Americans. Why? It's because of the food, the nutrient. But I do understand that if there is 4 components of the blood that a person can build the blood. They are, give me 1 second, I wrote it down. But just based on that topic, in Africa, it's not as prevalent. They do have sickle cell patients, of course. And I do like the point that Dr. Robinson had made, that based on the people in Africa, they are protected, and it is different. So it's a different strand. I thought I had sickle cell anemia I have, as an adult, I was told after having three children, I'm sorry, Justin, Ayan, and Geneve, hi guys, that I have sickle beta thalassemia. So the genetic components of the blood is extremely important. I do love the fact that Dr. Nichols did mention, and the senator, I want to say thank you very much. I want to thank you very much for making a drastic change in the United States with people with sickle cell. I know that people are going to get help. There are many ways to get a blood drive, many. Dr. Miller mentioned churches and movies, but now that school is out, now that people are out going to the gyms or something, like, get a healthy person, you know, show the fact that blood is needed everywhere. There are patients dying right now. I had a friend of mine, she had a rare blood type from Africa, and they had to do a blood drive just for her to get 1 pint of blood. You know, I learned that Dr. Drew made plasma, and he couldn't even get a pint of blood when he died. So it's important that we have people that are willing to give. So I'm here.
So let me just correct that. Dr. Charles Drew did not die because he did not get a transfusion.
No, he didn't.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. He died of a stroke, but he wasn't able to get his own blood.
No. So I think Dr. Miller is trying to, that is very important that we share with our community. That's not true.
That is
Dr.
not
Drew did not die from not being able to get a blood transfusion. He was in an accident. He got all the best medical care. He got everything was done. It's been very clear. His family has said that we have healthcare disparity. We have issues. That was not one of them. I think it's very important that we share that. So Taisha, when someone says that to you, you can say you found out today. Actually, that's not true.
Yes, I actually found out some, you know.
Yes.
He died of the injuries. He was in a car crash and he died from the injuries in the car crash.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to introduce I Am Created. I Am Created. I have an aftercare program here in South Florida. We cater to all the school board. We deal with parents and children. We tutor. We offer enrichment classes, and we go on field trips. They have to learn how to create. So therefore, there are ways to make many blood drives out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taisha. So there are questions in the chat. How do you want me to answer questions in the chat? Can we just take them offline and answer them? I know we have to wrap up right now, but I do want to answer questions that are in the chat.
Yeah, well, what we'll do is we'll get those to you and then we can get a response back, because I know we're running out of time now, but I just want to, on behalf of Stephanie, I know is and I together feel so grateful for all of you for coming. This has just been an amazingly wonderful, informative, educational, and awakening for so many of us to learn. And you all brought so much to it, and we're just so thrilled and excited to have been part of this. So we just want to say thank you. And I want to thank all of you for being proponents of blood donation, diverse blood donation, so important. Taisha, thank you so much for your story. It was so moving for all of us. Mwah. And I just want to say to all of those listening, please keep educating yourself. Please donate blood. As Dr. Miller said, if you can't do it, find someone to do it in your honor, in your name. The Red Cross is always looking for volunteers and folks to help us with these things. So please volunteer in your community. That's the best place for us to have your boots on the ground. And, you know, we have so many exciting things that we're doing, the research, the work in sickle cell, the work with convalescent plasma. Please, you know, if you choose to donate, we'll put the money to the very, very best use we can to make sure it goes right back to the people who deserve and need our support. So thank you so much to everyone for just a wonderful moment today. Really,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.